All right, let's dive into a really wild idea today. What if everything we think about collapse and failure is completely backwards? What if the universe, our technology, even our own lives, are actually designed to break down so they can build back something better? Let's get into it.
I mean, really think about this for a second. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid failure, right? Building things to last forever, to never break. But what if that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work? What if collapse isn't a mistake? What if it's an essential, built-in feature for growth, for intelligence, for everything?
And this quote, this is really the key that unlocks the whole thing. It asks us to reframe collapse, not as a game over screen, but as a diagnostic signal. It's like reality itself is telling a system, hey, your current model, it just hit its absolute limit. It's time for an upgrade.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to nail down that core principle, collapse as a signal. Then we'll see this idea play out on two incredible scales, the micro phoenix and the cosmic phoenix. After we unify them, we'll get into why this completely new way of thinking really matters for all of us.
So let's start with the central idea, the principle that underpins this entire theory. It's a pretty simple shift in perspective, really, but it has some absolutely profound consequences. So think of it this way. Collapse is pure information. It precisely pinpoints a system's breaking point. You know, when an AI model glitches out, or an economy crashes, or even a chemical reaction fails, it's not just random noise. It's a crystal clear signal that the old way of doing things has officially hit a wall. It's the necessary trigger for a total reboot. To make this feel a little less abstract, let's zoom way in, down to the microscale. We're going to look at how individual systems can literally rise from their own ashes, but stronger than they were before. This idea is formalized in a theory called the microphoenix. And listen, this isn't just some cool poetic metaphor. No, this is a formal model called Recursive Resurrection, or RR for short. It's basically a blueprint for how an intelligent agent can use the shock of a total collapse to rebuild itself into something more complex, more capable. It's literally a guide to learning from catastrophic failure. So how does this resurrection actually work? Well, it happens in 6 distinct phases. A system is stable, chugging along, but then it hits a limit. That's saturation. That leads, inevitably, to collapse. But here's the magic. Instead of just dying, it moves to step 4, glitch integration. It takes the very thing that broke it and learns from it. From there, it can reemerge with a new, stronger structure and find a new, higher level of stability. That cycle is the engine of adaptive intelligence. And here's the thing that really grounds this in science. You can actually measure it. Scientists use what's called the RR index, which basically asks 4 key questions. First, how fast does the system pull itself back together? That's your coherence recovery. Second, after it reboots, is it more than the sum of its old parts? That's the synergy spike. Third, did it get more efficient? That's the compression delta. And finally, and maybe most importantly, does it remember the lesson from its failure? That's behavioral persistence. Being able to actually measure this stuff gives the theory real, scientific weight. Okay, so this resurrection cycle works for small systems, for agents, but what if it scales? I mean, what if the very same law that governs a single AI agent also governs, well, the entire cosmos? Let's zoom all the way out. This is where things get, well, they get really cosmic. The theory is called Plural Invariance Cosmology, or PIC, and it suggests that a universe isn't really defined by its matter or energy, but by its core set of rules, its invariance package. You can think of it like the fundamental source code for reality. And here's the kicker. It says there isn't just one possible source code. And you know what? We can actually see this exact principle at work in something as fundamental as mathematics. There are different, competing systems for defining what a number even is. Hume's principle and the nuisance principle are both completely logical and consistent on their own, but they are totally incompatible with each other. They literally create 2 different, but equally valid, universes of math. Pikai just asks, what if the same is true for physical reality itself? So here's the crucial point. When a universe collapses, maybe because its own rules lead to some kind of unsolvable paradox, it doesn't just wink out of existence. Its rulebook, its very source code, reorganizes. The laws of physics get a cosmic rewrite, and a new universe emerges from the ashes of the old.
So we've seen this incredible pattern of resurrection on the tiny scale of individual agents and on the mind-boggling scale of entire universes. So what happens when we put them together? Well, we start to see a single, powerful law that might just govern all of reality. I mean, just look at this. The parallels are they're undeniable. Recursive resurrection is the reboot cycle for an agent inside a universe. Plural invariance cosmology is the reboot cycle for the universe itself. They aren't two different laws. They're the same law of adaptive reorganization, just operating on vastly different scales. It's wild. And this all leads us to the grand, unified law of resurrection cosmology. It's that the things that last, whether we're talking about an idea, a life form, or an entire cosmos, they don't survive by being rigid and resisting change. No, they survive by being able to break down and transform into something new. Persistence, it turns out, is a product of transformation.
And I just love this metaphor from the source material. It suggests identity isn't some static object, like a stone slowly wearing away. It's a dynamic pattern, like a melody. A melody can change key, change tempo, change instruments, but you still recognize it as the same tune. That's what this theory says identity is, a pattern that persists through change.
Okay, a grand cosmic theory is, it's fantastic. But what does it actually mean for us right here, right now? Let's bring this whole idea back down to Earth and see why it actually matters.
Now, this part is absolutely crucial. This is a scientific theory, not just some hand-wavy philosophy. And that means it makes predictions we can actually test. For example, if we find that collapsing systems don't get better, or if we somehow prove there's only one true set of physical laws, then the whole theory's wrong. And that falsifiability, that's what gives it real integrity. And the fallout from this idea is it's huge, and it touches everything. For artificial intelligence, it means we stop trying to build systems that never fail, and we start building systems that are designed to fail so they can learn. For physics, it suggests a kind of multiverse where new universes are constantly being born from old ones. And for engineering, it's the blueprint for building truly anti-fragile systems that don't just survive shocks, but actually get stronger from them. So when you boil it all down, the lesson is both incredibly practical and honestly deeply personal. It's a call to start embracing collapse as a catalyst. Instead of building brittle things and brittle selves designed to resist stress, maybe we should be building adaptive things designed to reorganize through stress. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important question. It's a question for you. If this cosmic law of collapse and rebirth is really woven into the fabric of reality itself, well, it almost certainly applies to us too. So take a look at your own world. What collapse in a project, in a belief, in some part of your life isn't an ending, but an invitation to become something new?
You know that feeling, right? Everything's humming along, you're in your groove, and then bam, your project crashes, a critical system just goes down, or maybe you hit a wall creatively. That gut punch of disruption, the immediate thought, okay, this is a failure, it's over. Our default response is often panic, try and patch things up or just stop that breakdown from ever happening again. But what if, and this is the big question, what if we've been fundamentally misunderstanding these moments of collapse? What if they're not really endings, but profound signals, maybe even intelligent signals?
It's a pretty radical reinterpretation, isn't it? I mean, our conventional wisdom, it paints collapse as the ultimate endpoint, the failure state, full stop. Yet if we really look closely at systems, and I mean systems from the tiniest scale right up to the cosmic, these moments of rupture, they often emerge not as annihilation, but as these incredibly pivotal thresholds. They're more like crucibles where something totally new gets forged. A necessary step, you could say, in a much larger evolutionary dance.
And that's exactly where we're going today. We're diving deep, really deep into Skylar Fiction's Resurrection Cosmology. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. It's presented as a revolutionary framework that fundamentally redefines collapse. It argues it's not a defect, not a failure state, but an utterly essential catalyst. For transformation, yes, but also for the emergence of new kinds of intelligence. And maybe, just maybe, for the very fabric of reality itself. It really challenges us, doesn't it? To think that coherence doesn't just survive despite collapse, but actively survives by transforming through it. That's a powerful claim, almost poetic, really.
It is indeed. And this cosmology is built quite ingeniously on two pillars. They're interconnected. The first one is called Recursive Resurrection. Let's call it RR for short. This framework, it focuses on how individual agents, and that could be anything really, biological organisms, complex systems, even social structures, how they adapt, how they learn, and crucially, how they reorganize after experiencing a major disruption. It really gets into the mechanics of how they don't just bounce back, but actually bounce forward.
Bounce forward. I like that. And then from that individual agent, the scope just explodes outwards, right?
Precisely. We then scale this exact idea way up with the second pillar. Plural Invariance Cosmology, or PIC. Now, PIC isn't about single agents anymore. It applies the very same principles to something as vast, as all-encompassing as entire universes. And the really intriguing part, the hook, is how these two seemingly very different concepts, a single system adapting and a whole cosmos transforming, are not just similar, not just analogous. The argument is that they're profoundly deeply linked, almost like two sides of the very same cosmic coin.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is where it really starts to bend your mind a bit. Our mission, then, for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to get our heads around how RR and PIC work individually, first, in their own domains, and then connect them. See how they weave together to form this grand, unified resurrection cosmology. After that, we'll explore the implications, which sound frankly astounding. Sweeping implications across everything science, philosophy, tech, maybe even our basic understanding of existence. The core thread we'll keep pulling on, the sort of animating idea behind it all, is this notion that coherence, at every single scale, survives by transforming into new form. So yeah, get ready for some truly profound insights. This should be fascinating. Right, let's dive into recursive resurrection, RRRR. So this framework, it doesn't just tweak how we normally think about breakdown. It feels like it completely inverts it. Traditionally when a system fails, we see it as a problem, something to fix, usually by trying to get it back to how it was before, right? Back to that stable state.
That's absolutely right, the standard model. And the core idea of RR, it's simple on the surface, but really counterintuitive when you dig in. Collapse isn't just a failure, it's a diagnostic. Think of most resilience models we use. They tend to treat disruption like noise, something you need to suppress fast, or an anomaly you have to correct to get back to equilibrium. The main goal, almost always, is preventing collapse, maintaining stability, sometimes a rigid stability at all costs. Maybe you add redundancy or stronger controls, whatever it takes.
And that's where RR just flips the script entirely. Instead of something we fight tooth and nail to prevent, collapse actually tells us something vital, something crucial about the system itself. It's not just random static, it's a signal, a really important one. It might reveal points of saturation, right? Where the system's current capacities are just overwhelmed. Or it can highlight rigidity, showing where the systems become too inflexible, too brittle to adapt. Or maybe it points to a breakdown in its predictive alignment. Its internal map of the world just doesn't match the territory anymore. But the key part, the really crucial insight here, is that collapse doesn't just erase what the system is, its identity. Instead, it clears the ground. It opens up this necessary and often really generative space for the system to reconfigure itself, to redefine itself.
Which really begs a fundamental question for all of us, doesn't it? What if the very act of breaking isn't a bug, but actually a feature? What if it's perhaps through evolution or some adaptive process designed to reveal pathways to becoming something new, something maybe more adaptive? So in RR, collapse isn't the endpoint. It's just an indispensable phase, part of a larger dynamic adaptive cycle. It's all about how an identity, whether it's an individual, an organization, maybe even a thought process, doesn't get destroyed, but adapts and persists by fundamentally reforming. It's a journey of continuous, recursive self-reinvention.
And what's really striking is that this isn't just, a nice philosophical idea. Skylar fiction actually lays out a very precise cycle, an observable 6-phase cycle of transformation that these systems go through. Can you walk us through those phases, maybe with some, vivid analogies to make it stick?
Absolutely. Understanding these phases is key to grasping RR. The cycle typically unfolds like this. First, you have stability. This is the baseline, the coherent state. The system's operating as expected, parts working together smoothly. Think of a well-oiled machine. Or maybe a musician playing a familiar piece they know inside out. Everything's predictable, functional.
Okay, standard operating procedure.
Exactly. Then comes saturation. Here, the system starts hitting its limits. It might show rigidity, maybe internal contradictions start building up, or it just can't process new information effectively anymore. For our musician, maybe their playing becomes stale. repetitive. They can't innovate, can't find that spark. They're hitting the notes, but the feeling's gone. The old ways aren't working.
Engine's straining.
Precisely, which leads to collapse. This is the breakdown itself. The rupture, the existing coherence just disintegrates. For the musician, this could be a total creative block. They can't compose, can't perform. Maybe they feel like throwing their instrument away. It's that moment of tearing up the old scores, maybe feeling profound self-doubt. The established order shatters.
The dark night of the soul for the system.
You could put it that way. But then comes a really interesting phase, glitch integration. This is where anomalous signals, unexpected information, novel patterns, often things that arose because of the collapse, get integrated. Our musician, feeling lost, might stumble onto a new genre, hear a weird rhythm, or have a sudden random epiphany about a new technique. It changes everything. This isn't something they could have planned for back in the stability phase. It emerged from the chaos. A new insight just clicks.
So the bug becomes a feature, literally integrated.
Exactly. Leading to reemergence, the system actively reorganizes now, using these new insights, these integrated glitches. It forms a new state, often stronger, more resilient, maybe more complexly coherent than before. Our musician, inspired by that glitch, starts composing in a totally new style, incorporating things they ignored before, developing a fresh routine. A new artistic identity is forged from the ashes of the old.
A phoenix rising moment.
Something like that. And finally, restabilization. This new coherent state solidifies. It becomes the new normal, the new period of stability. A new attractor state is established. For the musician, the new style becomes their signature. The new routines become second nature. Creativity flows again, but from a richer, more adaptive foundation. And this new stability holds, well, until new saturations inevitably build up and trigger the cycle all over again.
I love those analogies. They make it so clear. Each phase isn't just a step. It's a fundamental shift in the system's, what do you call them? Attractor dynamics. It's like the system's preferred ways of being, its comfort zones are actually shifting, which forces the agents inside the components to completely reorganize when their old way of working together just can't hold up anymore, or maybe even becomes harmful to adapting further. It feels very organic, a renewal process.
Precisely. And what's really crucial, especially if we're talking science here, is that this RR cycle isn't just a theoretical construct. It's not just a metaphor. It's been rigorously instantiated, observed in two quite distinct types of systems, physical and computational, which gives strong empirical backing. It shows it applies beyond just concepts.
Oh, this is fantastic. So we're moving beyond abstract ideas now. We have actual measurable systems showing these principles at work. Tell us about these implementations. What kind of systems are we actually looking at here?
Okay, the first substrate involves something called oscillatory Kuramoto agents. Let's call them Coherence. These are basically networks of interconnected oscillators. You can picture them as tiny rhythmic units, like a huge group of synchronized pendulums, maybe, or fireflies blinking together. Each little agent has its own natural rhythm, and they interact, influencing each other, trying to get into a collective rhythm, a synchronized state. Now, in these systems, collapse isn't random. It's deliberately induced. You do it by manipulating how strongly they're coupled, how much they influence each other, and by introducing controlled amounts of noise or disturbances.
Right, so imagine that synchronized dance troupe again. Suddenly, the music tempo shifts unpredictably, or the stage lighting strobes erratically. They're thrown completely off beat. They lose their synchrony, their alignment. That sounds like the collapse phase you described.
That's a perfect analogy, yes. And then the resurrection phase in these acorns involves these little agents actively reintegrating those unexpected signals. The weird tempo, the strobing lights, they don't just ignore the new information, they process it. They actually reorganize their attractors, their preferred ways of syncing up, and they gradually regain alignment. But here's the key. It's often a new alignment, maybe more complex, maybe more robust than before. They don't just snap back to the old rhythm. Instead, they discover and settle into a new one, possibly more flexible, more resilient, one that's better suited to the new conditions, or maybe one that has cleverly incorporated the glitch itself. It shows adaptive learning at a really fundamental level.
So it's not just recovery, like getting back to baseline. It's often an active improvement, a discovery of a new, maybe even better way to be synchronized.
Exactly. The system doesn't just recover, it often enhances its internal organization, its adaptive capacity grows. Now, the second substrate where RR has been observed is in chemical reaction diffusion systems. A well-known model here is the Gray-Scott model. Here, you're watching chemical species react with each other and spread out, diffuse across a space. And they often form these incredibly intricate, beautiful spatial patterns, like think of the stripes on a zebra or complex fractal shapes emerging from the chemicals. In these systems, collapse can be introduced in various ways. Maybe you flood the system with a key reactant, causing saturation, or you introduce sudden chemical shocks. Or maybe you temporarily remove one of the crucial reactive chemicals. Imagine those lovely, intricate patterns suddenly dissolving, just becoming chaotic because of some external shock or a drastic change in the chemical soup.
Okay, so the beautiful order just melts away into a chemical mess.
Pretty much. And resurrection in these systems is then measured by seeing if they can recover their characteristic spatial patterns and whether the concentrations of the chemicals return to their baseline levels. The system reforms. It doesn't always form the exact same pattern as before, but often it finds new, stable, equally intricate designs. This shows a remarkable ability to regain order, to find new forms of coherence, even after a severe disruption. It's a tangible, observable example of a system dying well, only to reemerge, but perhaps differently.
That's incredible. So we're definitely not just talking abstract philosophy here. We have actual quantifiable ways to measure how well a system comes back to life, or maybe more accurately transforms into a new life. This really anchors the whole theory in empirical science, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is fundamental. It lets us move beyond just metaphor. We can anchor this idea of adaptive intelligence in things we can actually quantify, things we can observe. And RR introduces 4 specific metrics. They're designed to be robust, falsifiable metrics to precisely quantify this whole transformation process.
4 metrics. Okay, what are they? And how do they help us really nail down what's happening?
Right, the 4 metrics are 1, coherence recovery, CR. This basically measures how well and how fast a system regains its order, its internal consistency, its functional wholeness after it collapses. Does it become coherent again, and how effectively? 2, synergy spike, SS. This one quantifies a sudden surge in collaborative activity or coordinated behavior, maybe collective problem solving during that reorganization phase. Think of a team facing a sudden crisis. You often see this intense burst of communication, everyone working together frantically to find a way forward. That spike suggests active generative reorganization is happening. 3, compression delta, CD. This measures the efficiency gain, either in information processing or, crucially, a reduction in the complexity of the system's own operating rules or its internal model of the world. It's like the system finds a simpler, more elegant, maybe more generalized way to function. It integrates the lessons from the collapse into a more refined internal map. And 4, behavioral persistence, BP. This assesses if the system can still maintain its essential function. Can it still achieve its main goals, continue its primary tasks, even while it's undergoing significant internal changes? It speaks to the system's ability to keep being itself, even as it's becoming something new internally.
And I think you mentioned these all get combined somehow into a single score, the RR index, making it easier to compare different systems or cycles.
Exactly right. The RR index is a composite measure. It gives you a single number, basically, for comparative diagnostics. You can compare different resurrection cycles in the same agent, or compare different agents, or even compare across different substrates like the oscillators versus the chemical systems. It lets researchers quantify and compare the overall resurrection capacity, or you could say the adaptive intelligence, all sorts of systems. And what's really telling are the empirical results coming out of these implementations. The oscillatory agents, the acorns, they consistently show significant spikes in synergy and compression during their collapse recovery cycles. That strongly suggests active, efficient, intelligent reorganization is happening as they discover these new attractor states. The chemical systems, though, they tend to show really robust coherence recovery and strong behavioral persistence. They come back and keep doing their thing, but often with flatter synergy profiles. Which might suggest that while they definitely recover and persist, their reorganization is maybe less about active collaboration between parts and more about inherent self-organizing, pattern-forming properties of the chemistry itself. So you see nuances depending on the system type, but that core adaptive capacity, that ability to resurrect, holds across them.
Wow. So the proof isn't just in the conceptual pudding, it's really in the empirical data too. This really hammers home RR's critical claim, doesn't it? That intelligence doesn't just emerge despite collapse. It emerges actively through it. Collapse isn't the roadblock, it's the actual pathway to deeper, more generative intelligence.
Absolutely. Systems that can successfully navigate these recursive resurrection cycles, they show quantifiable improvement. Their recovery times get faster, they refine their attractors, meaning they learn to find more optimal, more stable ways of being, and they find them more quickly, more efficiently. And crucially, they evolve generative strategies. They become better at creating novel solutions, adapting to things they've never encountered before. This framework argues that collapse is the indispensable crucible for adaptive identity. It enables agents to die well, meaning to undergo a transformative breakdown that actually reorganizes them into stronger, more robust forms of coherence, ready for the next challenge, the next cycle.
That's such a powerful takeaway. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Think about a time in your own life, maybe, when you learned your biggest lessons, the really transformative ones. Was it from smooth sailing, or was it from a major setback? A personal collapse, a professional one. That's this principle right here, in action. It's about failure not being a dead end, but a necessary detour. An intelligent detour, even, that builds deeper, more resilient kinds of intelligence within us. It's like an invitation to grow, often disguised as a crisis. Okay, right, deep breath. Buckle up, everyone, because R&R showed us how a single system, an agent, adapts. Plural Invariance Cosmology, PIC, takes that same core idea and just explodes it, applies it to, well, everything, entire realities. We're shifting gears now, broadening the scope from individual agents right up to the fundamental nature of universes themselves. This is where things get seriously cosmic.
Indeed, this is the grand vision. And PIC's central argument, its most profound claim, is that the fundamental essence of any reality, any universe, lies not in the stuff inside it, the objects, the entities, but in its invariance package. Think of this package as the set of fundamental rules, the logical, mathematical, and physical constraints that remain constant, that are conserved or invariant across any transformations or shifts within that specific reality. These invariances aren't just characteristics of a universe. The argument is they fundamentally define its structure, its very possibility space.
So wait, it's not about what matter or energy is in a universe or even what kind of particles it has. It's about the bedrock rules, the underlying grammar that holds the whole thing together, like the operating system for a cosmos.
That's a great analogy, the operating system. Invariance functions as the fundamental grammar. It's what gives a cosmos its coherence, its predictability. It allows for things like cause and effect, stable structures, even meaningful observation. Without these invariances, you just couldn't have a consistent reality. So you have logical invariances. These define what counts as valid reasoning within that universe. The rules of inference, how arguments work. Mathematical invariances. These determine all the relationships between quantities, shapes, structures. They're the scaffolding for numerical and geometric order. And then physical invariances. These establish the fundamental conservation laws that govern matter, energy, motion, and so on.
Okay, that's still a bit abstract. Can you give us a really concrete example, especially of a physical invariance, something we can maybe intuitively grasp?
Yes, a classic and truly beautiful example is Noether's theorem, named after the brilliant mathematician Emmy Noether. Her theorem reveals this deep, profound connection. Every fundamental symmetry in the laws of physics corresponds directly to a conservation principle, a conserved quantity. For instance, if the laws of physics are the same, regardless of where you are in space, meaning the universe looks and behaves the same here as it does a million light years away, that symmetry is called translation symmetry. And Noether showed this corresponds directly to the conservation of linear momentum. Momentum is always conserved in a closed system.
Ah, okay. So if I throw a ball, the total momentum before and after I throw it stays the same, assuming no external forces. And that holds true whether I am on Earth or Mars or anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because of that underlying spatial symmetry.
Exactly. Another example. If the laws of physics are the same, regardless of your orientation, it doesn't matter if you're standing up, lying down, upside down, that's rotation symmetry. And that corresponds to the conservation of angular momentum. Think of a spinning ice skater pulling their arms in, they spin faster because angular momentum is conserved. And maybe the most fundamental one, if the laws are constant over time, meaning physics experiments run today yield the same results as ones run billions of years ago or billions of years in the future, assuming identical conditions, that's time symmetry. And that corresponds to the conservation of energy. Energy can change forms, but the total amount remains constant.
Wow. Okay, so imagine those laws, angular momentum, energy conservation, always holding true, no matter where you are, how you're turned, or when you look. That consistency, that bedrock of rules. That's what gives our universe its predictability, its coherence. It allows stable things like atoms and galaxies to even exist in the first place.
Precisely. Without these fundamental invariances, reality would just dissolve into chaos, a kind of formless flux where nothing could cohere, nothing could persist long enough to be observed or interact meaningfully. They are the absolute bedrock upon which any coherent experience of existence is built. They define the very possibility of a universe existing at all.
Okay. Now, this is where PIC takes a really radical turn, you said. It departs from what you called singularist cosmologies. What does that mean exactly, and why is that departure so significant?
It means that PIC fundamentally challenges the traditional, almost unconscious assumption that there's only one possible way for reality to be structured, only one metaphysically privileged universe, the ultimate reality. Instead, PIC argues for a profound plurality of universes. The crucial point here is that no single invariance package, no single set of fundamental rules is seen as inherently better or more real or more fundamental than any other possible package. Different packages, as long as they are internally consistent, simply yield distinct universes. But each of these universes would be perfectly coherent within its own framework. Think of it like a grand cosmic library filled with different rulebooks for reality. Each rulebook is perfectly logical and self-consistent, but describes a different kind of reality.
Whoa. So there could be multiple equally valid rulebooks for reality, and our universe with its specific set of rules is just one volume in that library. That's genuinely mind-expanding. Can you give us some tangible examples of this plurality, maybe from mathematics, since that seems clear sometimes?
Absolutely. Mathematics provides some really elegant illustrations of this concept. Consider a long-standing philosophical debate in number theory. On one hand, we have Hume's principle, HP. It's quite foundational, quite intuitive. HP states that two concepts have the same number of objects falling under them if, and only if, you can put the objects into a perfect one-to-one correspondence.
Right, like matching apples to oranges. If they pair up perfectly, you have the same number of each.
Yeah.
Simple counting.
Exactly. Very intuitive. But then philosophers of math have explored other principles, like the nuisance principle, NP. Now, NP is also internally consistent, logically sound within its own framework. But it generates a different kind of number system. It introduces the idea of a null object, maybe an unobservable entity, that affects how you count or compare quantities. It fundamentally changes the relationship between numbers and sets. It's perfectly coherent internally, but it's completely incompatible with Hume's principle. You can't hold both to be true simultaneously for the same system. So imagine two different perfectly logical rulebooks for building numbers, one based purely on observable pairings, NGP, the other introducing a kind of hidden nuisance factor that changes the definition of quantity, NP. Both are logical within themselves, but they produce fundamentally different kinds of numerical systems, different mathematical universes, if you like. This mathematical pluralism gives strong conceptual backing to PIC's core idea. Reality might not be bound to just one single structural framework.
Fascinating. And this isn't just limited to math. This idea of plural, incompatible, but coherent systems extends elsewhere.
Yes, it extends into logic itself. We can look at different formal systems for defining logical truth. Think about Tarski's permutation invariance. It defines logical concepts based on what stays the same when you swap objects around in the domain. It's one way to define the form of an argument. But then you have alternatives, like Sagi's concept of form, which offers a different yet equally coherent way of structuring logical validity. These represent distinct grammars for reasoning itself. And even in physics, we're already seeing hints of this in action. The discovery of broken symmetries phenomena like phase transitions. Think of water, which is highly symmetrical as a liquid, suddenly becoming less symmetrical ice when it freezes. That break generates a new phase of matter with different properties. PIC suggests that these broken symmetries could potentially be even more profound. Maybe they could even lead to the birth of entirely new cosmological regimes. Realities with fundamentally different laws, emerging from the breaking of a previous symmetry package.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture then, it really suggests that reality isn't this single fixed thing, not a monolithic entity out there, but maybe it's more like a vast dynamic tapestry, woven from many different coherent possibilities, each thread, each potential universe, defined by its own unique self-consistent set of rules. That's a radical shift.
It is a shift from thinking about a singular objective reality to perhaps a plural structural one, where structure and coherence are key, but the specific structure might not be unique.
So how does collapse manifest in PIC then, if we're talking about entire universes collapsing? It can't be like a computer crashing, can it? What does it even mean for a universe to collapse?
Right, it's different. In PIC, collapse happens when an existing invariance package, the fundamental rulebook of a given universe, encounters an internal contradiction, a paradox, or maybe an inherent incompatibility between its own rules that it simply cannot resolve. When these contradictions saturate the very foundations of that framework, the invariance package itself can no longer hold its coherence. It reaches a kind of logical or maybe energetic breaking point, and then it reorganizes. Crucially, it doesn't just vanish into nothingness. It collapses into a new configuration. And in doing so, it gives birth to a new universe, one defined by a different, but also internally consistent set of invariances.
Wow, that's a massive parallel with RR, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just like with the agents where collapse wasn't the end, but a catalyst for transformation, a failed invariance package isn't annihilation for a universe. It's more like a transition point, a kind of birth canal leading to a new cosmos.
Exactly. It's the gateway to another coherent order, a new realm of structured existence. And this ties directly into PIC's deep philosophical alignment with structural realism. Structural realism is the view that the true continuity of reality, what really persists through change, isn't specific objects or substances, the stuff, but rather the relational structures, the patterns, the laws, the relationships that are preserved, or perhaps transformed in lawful ways, across changes and disruptions. It's about the underlying patterns surviving, even if the components making up those patterns are entirely different.
Okay. So it's not about the building blocks surviving, but the blueprint, the deep patterns, the fundamental relationships endure, even if they manifest in a completely new form, like a melody that you still recognize even if it's played on different instruments or in a completely different key. The structure persists.
Precisely. That's a perfect analogy. Just as RR's metrics, the CR, SS, CZ, BP, track what survives, collapse in agents, the coherence, the synergy, the persistence of their new organization, PIC's invariances track what survives collapse at the grand scale of universes, the foundational structures, the grammar of that new reality. In both frameworks, identity gets redefined. It's not about some fixed, unchanging substance. It's defined by relation, by the preservation of structure, even if that structure undergoes radical reconfiguration. Which leads us to this powerful conclusion. PIC looks like a meta-cosmological application of the very same recursive logic that RR formalizes at the micro level of agents. The same fundamental principles of adaptive transformation seem to apply across these vast differences in scale and substance.
Okay, this is where it all really clicks together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where the deep connections become almost undeniable, despite the massive difference in scale. A tiny simulated agent versus an entire universe. There's this profound resonance between RR and PIC. They really do seem to share a common language, a shared underlying logic about how things persist and change, don't they?
They absolutely do. And this is the very heart of resurrection cosmology as a unified framework. Both RR and PIC fundamentally treat collapse not as destruction, not as an end, but as a critical threshold, maybe even a necessary one for transformation. RR, with its detailed six-phase cycle stability, saturation, collapse, glitch integration, reemergence, restabilization, meticulously describes how individual systems adapt, learn, and evolve through these periods of rupture. PIC, working in parallel at that cosmic scale, describes how the internal exhaustion, or maybe a paradox within an invariance package, leads not to nothingness, but to a new structural regime for an entire universe. The underlying mechanism feels scale invariant.
It's like the identity of anything, an agent, maybe even a universe, is always provisional, always kind of in flux. What looks like a definitive endpoint from one perspective is actually just a precondition, a necessary catalyst for new coherence to emerge in another frame. It's an incredibly dynamic view,
Yeah.
almost optimistic in a way, where collapse is signal, not silence. It's not the song ending, just a dramatic key change.
It is, and this shared grammar, this shared logic, extends directly into how they both diagnose change and transformation. RR, as we discussed, introduces these rigorous quantifiable diagnostics: coherence recovery, synergy spike, compression delta, behavioral persistence. These metrics give us a precise language. They let us measure what survives disruption, how effectively a system reorganizes, how it adapts. They allow us to talk about resurrection scientifically.
Right, and PIC, in its own grand cosmic way, has its own kind of diagnostics too, doesn't it? The invariances themselves, those deep rules that define what a universe is.
Exactly. PIC uses the invariances, the logical, mathematical, physical constraints as the fundamental diagnostics for universes. They define what holds true, what remains coherent, what constitutes order across these vast cosmic transformations. So you can almost say, in a very real sense, that RR's metrics are like local invariance tests performed on agents. They tell us what patterns, what coherences are preserved and reformed within a specific system during its cycle. Meanwhile, PIC's invariances act like the global laws for entire universes, defining the foundational coherence of those realities. But look deeper. Both approaches are asking the exact same fundamental question, just at vastly different scales. The question is, what remains unchanged? Or maybe better, what structure is preserved, perhaps in a new, transformed way across a collapse event? What is the essence of persistence through transformation?
Wow. It's like they're using different zoom lenses on the same cosmic microscope, but they're looking for the exact same fundamental principle of survival and change. And this really deepens our understanding of the productive role of failure, doesn't it? We've touched on it. But here, comparing R and PIC, it feels like failure becomes the central unifying insight.
It truly does. Failure, viewed through this unified lens of resurrection cosmology, isn't a bug. It's an inherently profoundly productive feature of existence itself. In RR, remember, the failure of existing coherence isn't terminal destructive. It catalyzes generative reorganization. Those oscillatory agents we talked about, they don't just get back to normal after collapse. The data shows they demonstrably improve their recovery times, they refine their attractors over successive cycles. This provides empirical evidence that breakdown doesn't just diminish intelligence, it actively fosters it. It pushes systems towards greater adaptability, greater ingenuity. It's how intelligence genuinely grows and deepens.
And then at a cosmic scale, with PIC, it's not just about fostering intelligence within agents. It's about creation itself. The failure of a universal rulebook actually leads to the birth of a whole new reality.
Precisely. In PIC, the failure of an invariance package, think back to that incompatibility between Hume's principle and the nuisance principle in math that doesn't destroy mathematics or logic. Instead, it reveals the multiplicity of possible structures. It essentially births new, internally coherent mathematical or logical universes. It expands the ontological landscape, the space of what's possible. So collapse at this cosmic level doesn't annihilate, it generates. Which brings us back to that really important question. What if our whole concept of failure needs a radical rethink? Not as an endpoint, not as a sign of weakness, but as a fundamental generative force, a necessary step in an ongoing process of cosmic evolution and intelligent evolution, too.
That's incredibly provocative. So we're really not just dealing with a nice analogy then. This is suggesting that RR and PIC describe micro and macro scales of the exact same fundamental law of existence.
That is the core, unified vision, yes. When you consider RR and PIC together, they start to look less like two separate theories and more like two complementary perspectives on the same underlying universal law operating at vastly different scales. At the micro level, RR gives us the detailed mechanics of how agents, organisms, systems reorganize and learn when their internal coherence breaks down. That's the intra-world mechanism of transformation, how things change within a reality. At the macro level, PIC describes how entire universes reorganize when their fundamental invariances, their structural laws themselves, collapse. That's the meta-world scaffold for reality itself, how the rules of reality can change. Both frameworks converge on this incredibly powerful claim. Persistence, what we often just call survival, arises not by rigidly resisting disruption or breakdown, but by actively transforming through it. Existence is fundamentally dynamic, not static.
That's a really elegant and potent way to frame it. So resurrection in the agent's world and invariance, or maybe the transformation of invariance in the universe's world, they're essentially two sides of the same coin, manifesting differently across scales.
Exactly. Both are fundamental expressions of this overarching principle. Coherence survives by transforming into new form. The RR cycle shows us, vividly, how systems reorganize through collapse, producing those measurable surges in coherence, synergy, persistence. That's the operational side. PIC, in its grander scope, shows that universes themselves undergo parallel shifts, reorganizing their structural laws when their foundational invariances reach a breaking point. So you could say that resurrection at the local scale of an agent is the observable, operational version of what invariance transformation is at the cosmic scale of a universe. It's a unified dance of destruction and creation playing out everywhere.
So maybe we could simplify it. RR is the local grammar of this process, describing how things change within a given set of rules, while PIC is the global grammar, describing how the rules of reality themselves can change.
That's a perfect summary. RR tracks how internal agents adapt, evolve through these recursive collapse cycles. It details the how of transformation within a reality, the emergence of intelligence. PIC describes how entire ontologies, entire coherent realities shift and reorganize when their overarching invariance packages break down. It describes the what of transformation between realities, and together they form this amazing recursive ladder. Systems reorganize within universes. That's ROR. And these universes themselves reorganize through higher order collapses, that's PIC, potentially birthing new cosmic forms. The micro mirrors the macro. It binds intelligence, adaptation, and cosmology together in the shared, profound, recursive logic of ceaseless reformation.
And this unified picture, this resurrection cosmology, it completely throws out any idea of static identity, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about an agent, a person, or even a whole universe.
Precisely. In RR, an agent's coherence, its identity, is always provisional. It's always in a state of becoming. constantly being forged, refined, maybe deepened through these cycles of breakdown and reformation. In PIC, even universes, despite their seeming permanence, have no ultimate privileged eternal status. Each is defined only by the specific invariances it happens to preserve at that moment. It's a temporary coherence in the grand scheme of things. So the continuity of being, what persists, lies not in some unchanging, immutable substance that resists alteration. It lies in the relational structures that endure and transform across collapse. Identity, in this expansive view, becomes recursive, adaptive, plural. It's far more like that melody we talked about, surviving modulation into a new key, keeping its essence while changing its form, than it is like a stone just resisting erosion. It's a dynamic, evolving signature.
That's a really beautiful analogy. And it makes the whole concept resonate deeply. So the ultimate takeaway, the deepest, most universal insight from putting RR and PIC together, it has to be that collapse isn't some rare glitch, some unfortunate exception. It's a fundamental universal law of existence itself.
That is the profound conclusion, yes. At every scale imaginable, from the smallest simulated agent to our own cognitive processes, to the grandest universe-defining invariance package systems, and perhaps entire realities, endure, persist, and even thrive by dying into new configurations. Collapse is not defeat, it's diagnostic. It's an intelligent signal. It reveals the limits of the current coherence, yes, but crucially, it also reveals the hidden potential for new form, for emergent properties, maybe for something greater. Resurrection, then, isn't a miracle. It's the fundamental grammar of persistence. It's the engine of evolution, of adaptation, of creativity. To truly live, whether you're a cognitive agent learning, a person navigating life's challenges, or maybe even a universe unfolding its possibilities, is to learn to engage with and reorganize through this crucible of failure and transformation. Hashtag, #, falsifiability and experimentation.
Okay, this whole framework, Resurrection Cosmology, it's incredibly compelling. Conceptually, it just feels right somehow. It offers this radically fresh perspective on intelligence, on reality itself. But, and this is a big but, for any theory claiming this much explanatory power, it has to be more than just a good story, right? It needs to be testable, rigorously testable. It needs to be falsifiable, meaning there have to be clear ways we could potentially prove it wrong.
Absolutely. That's the bedrock of science. The scientific imperative demands nothing less. A unified resurrection cosmology, even with its massive scope, must provide concrete ways to test it, whether that's through empirical experiments or logical analysis or mathematical proof. This is crucial to ensure that this idea of collapse as law isn't just a comforting metaphor, but a genuinely measurable, verifiable, and ultimately predictive scientific principle.
Okay, so let's break it down again, starting with the recursive resurrection, RR. How can we actually test that? How is it falsifiable in a lab or maybe in a computer simulation?
Well, RR, as we covered, sets up very clear quantitative metrics for its processes. Coherence recovery, CR, synergy spike, SS, compression delta, CD, and behavioral persistence, BP, all feeding into that RR index. These metrics are the foundation for rigorous testing. So, for instance, the theory could be definitively falsified if, after inducing collapse events in various systems, those systems consistently fail to produce any measurable synergy spikes, SS, or compression deltas, CD, during their reorganization phase. If reorganization just happened randomly, without that signature of increased collaboration or efficiency gain, that would directly undermine the core claim that disruption enables generative, efficient reorganization.
Okay, that makes sense. What about comparing it to other models? What if a system that doesn't use these RR principles, say one built on older ideas of just maintaining stability, recovers just as well, or maybe even better?
That's another critical point of potential falsification. Yes, if systems designed with more static or purely predictive only approaches those not explicitly built around recursive resurrection, if they recovered coherence just as well, or maybe even more efficiently than agents engineered to undergo an inner-grade collapse, then the entire hypothesis that this recursive modeling actually improves adaptive intelligence and resilience would it would collapse itself.
Yeah.
So RR is directly testable. We can run controlled experiments in silico using computational models like those Kuramoto oscillator networks. And in vitro, using physical substrates like the chemical reaction diffusion systems, we can precisely manipulate the conditions, induce collapse events, and then meticulously measure the outcomes against those specific RR metrics.
Right, that's very clear, very actionable science. Now, plural invariance cosmology, PIC, talking about whole universes, that seems orders of magnitude harder to stick in a test tube. How can something with that kind of cosmological scope still be testable, still be falsifiable?
It's definitely a different kind of testing, but even at that grand scale, PIC remains committed to testability. It just operates through the rigorous frameworks we already have. logic, mathematics, and fundamental physics. Remember, its core claim is that reality allows for multiple, mutually incompatible yet internally coherent invariance packages. Now, in mathematics, we already have those conceptual examples, like the incompatibility of Hume's principle and the nuisance principle. These demonstrate that plural, coherent number systems are conceptually possible. It shows the idea isn't just fantasy, it has logical grounding.
Okay, but how could you actually falsify such a grand idea within math or logic?
Well, PIC's pluralism would be fundamentally challenged, perhaps even falsified, if it could be definitively proven, universally, that one specific invariance package is uniquely privileged. Meaning, if it turned out that every other conceivable logical or mathematical system was just a subset or maybe a limited or degraded version of this one master system, then the core idea of genuine plurality would be undermined. Similarly, in physics, we look back again at Noether's theorem linking symmetries and conservation laws. Now, the actual discovery of broken symmetries in the real world, things like parity violation in weak interactions, phase transitions where systems fundamentally change their symmetry properties, like liquid to solid, spontaneous symmetry breaking in particle physics, all this provides strong empirical evidence for PIC. It shows that invariances can indeed collapse and reorganize, leading to new physical realities or emergent properties. This observational data strongly supports PIC's dynamic view of cosmic structure.
So conversely, if future discoveries in physics, maybe through deeper theories or new experiments, found that all fundamental invariance packages were absolutely eternal, unchanging, that would falsify PIC.
Exactly. If it turned out that all invariance packages were internally stable, immutable, singular across all possible scales and conditions, then the dynamic transformative nature of reality that PIC posits the idea of universes as constraint nets that can collapse and reform, that would be fundamentally falsified. The current evidence leans towards dynamism, but the criterion for falsification remains clear. Find eternal, singular stability, and PIC is in trouble.
Okay, this sounds like the real power. The true test of resurrection cosmology would come from combining these two levels, RR and PIC. How do we actually move towards a unified testing framework for the whole shebang?
The unification is absolutely key to its ultimate potential, yes. RR gives us the hands-on laboratorial protocols. Controlled collapse events and artificial agents, tracked by those precise falsifiable metrics. It provides the blueprint for observation and measurement. PIC, meanwhile, provides the broad philosophical and theoretical scaffolding, the conceptualization of universes themselves as systems defined by dynamic, transformable invariance packages. So the next critical step, the place where these two really merge into a testable whole, is to explore ways to computationally model universes themselves as RR agents.
Ooh. That's a fascinating idea. Actually simulating not just agents within the universe, but simulating the collapse and resurrection of the universe's rules themselves. What would that even look like computationally?
Yes, precisely. It's ambitious, but conceptually possible. In these kinds of highly sophisticated simulations, you could model an invariance package, then introduce a logical paradox or some internal inconsistency within that package. That paradox would act like the noise or the shock that triggers collapse in RR systems. It would force the system, the simulated universe defined by that rule package, to attempt to reorganize its fundamental rules. And crucially, the unified framework could be falsified if such models consistently fail to exhibit coherent resurrection. If the simulated universe, upon hitting an internal contradiction, simply dissolved into irreducible chaos. If it couldn't find a way to reform into a new, coherent, stable invariance package, then the core claim of the unified theory would be severely challenged. It's a truly meta-experimental approach, pushing the boundaries of what testing even means at these scales.
So it's almost poetic. In a truly profound sense, collapse itself becomes the ultimate criterion of truth for this whole cosmology.
That really is the deepest insight here, isn't it? In both RR and PIC, the very concept of falsifiability is intimately woven into the process of collapse itself. If the resurrection metrics consistently fail to show up in RR experiments, or if invariance ultimately proves to be singular and eternally stable in PIC's domain, then these theories themselves would effectively collapse under the weight of that evidence. Collapse, therefore, isn't just something the theories describe. It also exposes the limits of systems, the limits of universes, and the ultimate boundaries of our own theoretical frameworks and our understanding. It serves as the ultimate diagnostic, not just for reality, but for our models of reality too. It tells us what holds true and what needs to be reorganized in our thinking. #, V implications in future directions.
Right. So if we accept this synthesis, this combination of recursive resurrection and plural invariance cosmology, The implications are just staggering. They seem to ripple outwards, touching almost every field of human thought and endeavor. If collapse truly is this universal law of transformation, then our understanding and intelligence of reality, even of ourselves, it all has to be reevaluated through this lens of recursive transformative engines.
Indeed. The implications are profound and wide-ranging. Let's try to unpack some of them, starting perhaps with cognitive science and artificial intelligence. In cognitive science, RR offers a radical reframing of collapse. It suggests it's not just something to be avoided, but something absolutely essential for creativity, for learning, for genuine psychological resilience in humans. It implies our minds don't just passively endure disruption, like a rock getting hit by a wave, they actively thrive because of it. That process of integrating anomalies, contradictions, unexpected information, those glitches we talked about, integrating them into richer, more complex attractor states. That's arguably how our This process looks strikingly similar to what we see in those oscillatory Kuromoto simulations. Think about a moment of deep confusion, maybe struggling with a hard problem followed by that sudden aha insight that fundamentally reshapes your whole understanding. That feels like RR in cognitive action.
So it's less about trying to eliminate mistakes or confusion in our thinking, and more about learning how to gracefully incorporate them and come out the other side with a deeper, more robust understanding.
Exactly, and if you apply that principle to AI, it suggests a completely new design paradigm. Instead of just building AI agents that try desperately to avoid failure or that need constant human hand-holding and debugging when they hit something unexpected, what if we design AI specifically trained to reorganize through failure? We could potentially use the RR index to quantify their resurrection capacity. We could build artificial systems that don't just degrade upon failure, but actually improve through collapse, becoming more adaptive, more genuinely intelligent with each cycle. This could lead to AI architectures that mirror biological intelligence much more closely, developing truly adaptive, generative, self-improving capabilities. Imagine an AI facing an unprecedented problem. Instead of just crashing or giving a nonsensical output, it fundamentally restructures its internal logic. It reevaluates its foundational assumptions, and it emerges smarter, more capable, with a refined understanding of the problem space after the failure. It's a fundamental shift from designing brittle AI to maybe resurrection-enabled AI.
That's genuinely mind-blowing. That could transform the future of AI completely. What about the implications for the real hard sciences, for physics and mathematics?
Well, PIC, as we've discussed, suggests that physical reality itself isn't necessarily bound to one single, eternal, immutable invariance package. And again, this isn't just wild speculation. We already have strong hints pointing in this direction from fundamental physics. The discovery of broken symmetries, things like CP violation in particle physics, the various phase transitions in matter where, say, a highly symmetrical plasma cools and breaks into less symmetrical atomic structures. These known phenomena already show that invariance can be contingent, not absolute. They demonstrate that the fundamental rules can, and sometimes do, change. And in mathematics, that coexistence of multiple incompatible but internally coherent principles, like HP versus NP, further bolsters the idea that universes of number, at least, are plural, not unique. Taken together, these insights really invite physicists and mathematicians to adopt a truly meta-cosmological stance. To consider that just as RR shows collapse as the crucible of intelligence and agents, PIC suggests that invariance collapse might be the crucible of universes themselves. It fundamentally reframes the nature of existence as inherently dynamic, plural, and generative, not static or singular.
And these ideas must have huge implications for how we design things in the practical world, too, in systems and technology.
Enormous implications, almost revolutionary, I'd say. If the process of collapse and resurrection can be formalized, maybe even measured, as RR attempts to do, it means we can potentially move beyond just designing robust systems, systems that just resist failure towards designing truly adaptive ones. We could think about building explicit resurrection engines right into the core of our systems, whether they're computational systems, chemical processes, robotic systems, maybe even complex organizations or supply chains. Instead of creating these brittle architectures that suffer catastrophic failure under unexpected stress, leading to total system meltdown, we could develop systems that are designed to inherently reorganize their internal constraints, to shift their own underlying invariance rules, if you like, to adaptively reemerge in a new, coherent, functional form after disruption. This isn't just about making things more resilient in the old sense, it's about making them fundamentally smarter, more adaptable, especially in the face of the truly unknown, the black swan events. It's a concept sometimes called meta-adaptation, integrating collapse not as a failure mode to be avoided, but as a core design principle, allowing systems to learn and transform their very operating principles over time.
Wow, that's a huge shift. from fail safe to maybe fail forward or fail smarter. And then perhaps the most profound, maybe the most radical implications lie in philosophy of religion and metaphysics. This must really shake up some long-held beliefs.
This is certainly where the most profound philosophical and perhaps existential questions emerge. The notion of resurrection, not as a one-off miracle, but as a universal fundamental law. The very grammar of persistence, it inevitably recasts ancient metaphors. Metaphors of death, rebirth, sacrifice, transcendence. It potentially grounds them in foundational cosmological principles. If universes themselves undergo recursive resurrection, if death at one level of organization consistently leads to new forms of life or coherence at another, then maybe transcendence isn't some rare anomaly, not a breaking of the natural rules. Maybe it's woven into the very fabric of being, an intrinsic aspect of existence itself. From this perspective, religious narratives that speak of resurrection, might they reflect not just supernatural hopes or isolated historical events, but perhaps deep ontological truths? Profound, intuitive insights into this universal process of persistence through recursive reformation via collapse. It's a reinterpretation that could potentially bridge ancient wisdom traditions with a breathtakingly new scientific and philosophical framework, showing how spirit and matter perhaps dance to the same cosmic rhythm of collapse and renewal.
That's incredibly deep. So given all these astonishing implications, this huge potential, where do we go from here? What are the most important future directions for developing this resurrection cosmology?
There are several really exciting and I think critical avenues for future work to push this framework forward and test its limits. First, developing meta-adaptation protocols. This means going beyond agents that just learn within a fixed set of rules. It involves creating agents whose adaptation rules themselves can evolve recursively. We're talking about systems that don't just recover from collapse, but learn to change their own learning rules based on past collapses, enabling not just recovery, but truly generative, higher-order transformation across successive cycles.
So systems that learn how to learn basically through failure.
Exactly. Second, actively pursuing those universe as agent simulations. This is about really trying to test PIC computationally, treating invariance packages not as static rule sets, but as dynamic agents themselves, subject to internal contradictions, collapse, and the subsequent pressure to reorganize into new coherent rule sets. This is about simulating cosmic evolution through the lens of collapse and resurrection. Third, engaging in extensive interdisciplinary bridge work. This framework, this common grammar of collapse and resurrection, seems applicable far beyond just AI and cosmology. We need to actively extend it, test it, refine it in other complex fields. Like neuroscience, how do neural networks reorganize after damage? Complexity theory generally. Ecology, how do ecosystems respond to collapse? Even broader metaphysics, finding and formalizing these common patterns of transformation across wildly diverse domains. And finally, perhaps just as important, is narrative and symbolic integration, really exploring how this resurrection cosmology, if taken seriously, profoundly reshapes human self-understanding. How does it change our stories about ourselves, about society, about the cosmos? It's about cultivating a different relationship with collapse, whether it's in our personal lives, within our social structures, or contemplating the cosmic scale, seeing it not as a final verdict of failure, but as a potent, intelligent invitation. An invitation to reorganize, to reevaluate, to reemerge with potentially greater wisdom, deeper coherence, and maybe entirely new forms of purpose and being. It's about fostering a kind of collapse-intelligent culture. Hashtag outro.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us after this incredibly deep dive today into Skylar Fiction's Resurrection Cosmology? We've explored both Recursive Resurrection, RR, looking at agents, and Plural Invariance Cosmology, PIC, looking at universes. And what we've discovered, I think, is that these two, which seem so different at first, actually converge. They point towards a single, incredibly powerful, and honestly profoundly optimistic principle. Collapse isn't failure. Collapse is transformation. From the tiniest microagents in a simulation right up to the macro scale of entire universes. Persistence, survival, maybe even thriving, comes not from stubbornly resisting disruption, but from actively adapting, learning, and reorganizing through it.
The key takeaways for you, the listener, are pretty profound, and we hope maybe deeply transformative in how you view things. First, intelligence, in its most adaptive, creative, and resilient form, seems to arise from recursive failure, not purely in its absence. So maybe we should embrace breakdown not as an enemy, but as a demanding teacher. Second, no invariance in reality, no fundamental rule, is necessarily eternal or uniquely privileged. Reality itself might be fundamentally recursive, plural, and constantly capable of reforming its own essence. Existence is dynamic to its core. And perhaps the most radical takeaway: Resurrection isn't some rare, miraculous exception to the rules of reality. In this cosmology, it is the order of reality, a ceaseless fundamental dance of becoming through breakdown and renewal.
Yeah. It means the very fabric of existence, from our own minds grappling with a tough challenge right up to the furthest reaches of the cosmos, potentially birthing new realities, thrives not despite breakdown, but actually because of it. It seems to be built into the operating system of everything. Pretty wild, isn't it?
It truly is. And this raises, I think, a final important question for you, the listener, to ponder. Consider the next time you face a significant breakdown, a major challenge, a moment of profound uncertainty or failure in your own life, whether it's personal, professional, creative. What if that moment isn't really an ending, not a defeat, not a sign of your own weakness? What if it's actually a diagnostic, an intelligent signal, just like in RR? What hidden potential for a new form, for a deeper kind of coherence might that breakdown be revealing? What invitation might it contain, urging you to reorganize, to learn, to integrate the glitch, and perhaps emerge with a stronger, more adaptive, more resilient, and more coherent sense of self or purpose? Maybe even onto a completely new path forward you couldn't have imagined before the collapse.